Please join me in welcoming the 2024 Aram Lecturer in Business Ethics, Gonzaga University President, Dr. Thayne McCulloh.
Quick story from our family. When I first became president, I was wont to go on and on and on at events where I had a speaking role. And I learned somewhere in the middle that our daughters were timing me. And they would give me feedback on how well I had done based on how much I shortened my remarks at the successive event. So I got to be more and more efficient at delivering remarks, tempting though it is, to have a captive audience and to be together once again with my favorite friend, which is a microphone. So thank you, first of all, to all of you for taking the time tonight. I hope that what I might share with you might be at least interesting, if not helpful or informative in some way. And I want to thank Professor Steverson for the invitation. He actually lured me into this by promising me at least 10% of the gate receipts for tonight's event, so I'm going to hold him to that. I think that it was important for you to know that I chose the title for tonight's event and recognize that in doing so, immediately set expectations. So one of the evaluative determinations that you get to make as an audience is whether or not the presentation lives up to the title. But I do have some things that I'd like to share with you that I hope allow you to consider this an investment of time well worth making, but recognize that one of the things that's truly ironic about the work that I do and the job that I've had here at Gonzaga for these last 15 years is that while it has a certain profile and there's a certain public image to the role of a university president, the truth is that many people don't actually know what the university president does, what the job actually involves or entails. And so in order to make sense of some of the observations that I want to share with you tonight, it's necessary for me to unpack my perspective, at least, on what that role is here at Gonzaga and how I've tried to live that role out for you. And then hopefully what I do share with you about some of the ethical implications of the work will make a little bit more sense. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for giving me an opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you on these issues. Where I'd like to begin tonight is with an acknowledgement of something that I really believe and that I have come to believe even more strongly over time. And that is that we, each and every one of us, are a product of our history. When we think about leaders in various roles, whether they're in for-profit organizations or non-profit, whether they're in civic jobs of responsibility, the governor or the mayor or an elected representative, we all bring to the leadership style that we have our history. And I have had the opportunity to work with many leaders over the years and to get to know a lot of university presidents, yes, but other leaders from other organizational contexts as well. And it's striking to me, in part because of my academic discipline, how true this really is. When you think about the ways in which we think about what constitutes an effective leader, we're usually doing, whether we're aware of it or not, a kind of internal resonating on our history and our experience. Some of our earliest patterns around leadership are imprinted by parents or guardians, individuals who are responsible for our care. I don't know how many of you here remember your kindergarten teacher, but I remember my kindergarten teacher. She was an incredibly impactful individual in my very young life. It is really witnessing and experiencing interactions with people over time in various contexts that create for us what you might refer to as a layperson's evolved sense of our style of leadership. Sometimes we have a leader or a mentor who is so impactful that we may actually appropriate some of their style or some of their mannerisms into the ways in which we do our work, because we find the ways in which they moved with us and with the communities of which we are a part to be so impactful. So as we think about sort of our native style of leadership, I always like to reflect first on the reality that we are products of our history, and that many of the experiences that each and every one of you have moved through in your lives have had an impact on shaping your impression of what leadership means and what an effective leadership style might require. A lot of people don't know this about me because it's been so long since I occupied this particular space within our community, but for about 10 years I taught at Gonzaga University out of the psychology department. Admittedly, I have been an administrator for most of my 30-plus years at the university, but I did teach in an adjunct capacity and as a part-time member of the department for about a decade, exclusively working at the undergraduate level, starting with foundational courses like general psychology or intro to psych, and then moving up into the upper division electives as the department needed it. I am a social psychologist by discipline. I was trained here at Gonzaga University as an undergraduate and then went on to do my graduate work at the University of Oxford, really focusing on the formation of a cognitive structure, if you will, that of stereotyping and gender stereotypes, which was heavily influenced by the work of teachers and scholars here at the university. And then over the course of my time, as I became immersed in the teaching work, I became focused on leadership and especially the role and relationship between mentors and mentees or proteges, and really examined the ways in which that was influencing a variety of professions, and that's an entirely different subject for a different time. But I think what's really important is that you know that I do bring the lens of my experience as a social psychologist to the applied work of the presidency, and that has proven time and time again to at least be impactful, if not successful, in the ways in which I have attempted to work. We often, when we think about the influence of leaders, really look at the individual, we look at their talents and their skills, but leadership is really an interactive relationship between an individual and sometimes groups of individuals and those that they are leading, those that are willingly choosing to be a part of an organization in the role of follower. And so when I think about what constitutes an effective leader, I really think not only about an individual who is capable of sort of developing a vision that people can get around and that they can understand, but also an individual who really understands and appreciates that leadership, effective leadership, can only be considered or exist in the context of a relationship. And that relationship is an interdependent, active relationship. It's one that really depends on people who believe in the vision of what it is that the organization is trying to do, believe in what the leader is trying to accomplish, and probably even see themselves as part of making that possible. And so an effective leader, from my perspective, also is somebody that really understands and appreciates that everybody involved in the experience brings value, and all of the individuals in the experience bring unique perspective out of their own personal history, as well as talent and skill that they can bring to bear on addressing or solving issues. But another perhaps more vulnerable and riskier dimension of sort of this revelatory piece is to talk about another expression of my identity, which definitely influences my leadership style. And that has to do with the fact that I'm not only a university president, an employee of Gonzaga University for these last 3 decades, I'm also the product of a family, and I am also a member of a family. I also have other roles and other expressions that are part of my personal history that have had an impact on the way in which I think about leadership, in the way I think about relationships. My own personal history comes out of a family situation that was not actually entirely functional. In fact, in the parlance of the 70s and the 80s psychology, it would be referred to as dysfunctional. A dysfunctional family that was informed by a lot of anger, a certain amount of abuse, and also impacted by the influence of alcoholism and depression and mental illness. These are all part of what gave shape and form to my desire to enter psychology. And I know from working with many students over the years that they too often have turned to the discipline of psychology first to better understand their own personal history and to understand how their families functioned, how their relationships with parents operated, and perhaps some of that might have been born out of their own similar experience of not always evolving out of the perfect or even a reasonably healthy family dynamic. Because the truth of the matter is that there are many examples of dysfunctional families and relationships in family units. And we see evidence of that playing out time and time again as we look at a variety of issues that inform and impact our society. I am a product of both public education as well as Catholic education. My early years were in public schools. My later years were in Catholic schools, including high school, which was in Seattle, Washington. And in part out of a very disastrous experience of my later years of secondary school and high school, I really found myself as an individual lacking structure and direction. And inevitably, where I found myself was turning to an opportunity which became enlistment in the United States Army. A lot of people during my time early at Gonzaga as students knew very well that I had come from the military because I came freshly from the military to Gonzaga as an undergraduate. And the fact that I had been in the military influenced deeply the ways in which I formed relationships and the ways in which I was able to interrelate with my peers. So for example, even though many of the students with whom I interacted were actually first year and second year students, and even at that time, the state of Washington had a law on the books that said you had to be 21 in order to buy alcohol, I was already 21. That was the basis of many great relationships that people wanted to form, at least with me, but my military upbringing prevented me from cooperating in that interaction, at least most of the time. I chose the profession of cook when I was in the military. I was given 2 options. The other was far less attractive to me. It was a nuclear warhead specialist, which I didn't see a lot of call for on the outside, so I decided to become a cook, which turned out to be valuable in many ways. But it was really the experience of being in the military that allowed me and created an opportunity for me to have some structure and to gain a sense of what I wanted and what I also didn't want for myself going forward. One of the things I discovered was I did not want to stay in the Army. But the Army was actually very good for me and very good to me. And without the military support that I received through the Veterans Educational Assistance Program, I never would have been able to come to Gonzaga. it actually made it financially possible for me to be here. And though I worked throughout my time at Gonzaga as well at work-study jobs and as an RA and RD and different ways of subsidizing the experience, the military really proved to be instrumental in getting me onto a track that enabled me to imagine what I could become. And Gonzaga really came through for me in fulfilling, filling out that image by allowing me to dream about what it would be like to be a college graduate, maybe even move on into a particular profession, which was so far removed as an idea from where I left high school that I can't even adequately describe it. I think one of the reasons that I want to share this is because I think a lot of people look at leaders and they encounter them as they are in that moment, and they make a lot of assumptions implicitly about whatever they think about that individual in terms of their level of success or accomplishment, as if that's how they've always been. But as a matter of fact, there are many stories of effective leaders who started under less than ideal conditions and had an awful lot of help along the way from many people who created opportunities for them. And as a result of seizing those opportunities, individuals were able to do something other than what they otherwise might have been able to do. It was Gonzaga University that took a high school ne'er-do-well and allowed him to go to Oxford University. Now, I always suspected that Oxford was really after my money because the best student possible for an Oxford University to admit was somebody who was a full-pay student. And international students for the UK at that time were considered to be full-paid students. But the reality is that my faculty there and my fellow students there, and even students who were actually attending Oxford, made clear that the breadth and the depth of the education that I had received at Gonzaga was actually far superior to the breadth and the depth of the educational experience that many of the students they saw come to Oxford from other countries brought with them. And that made me feel even more appreciative of the experience that I had had at Gonzaga and appreciative of the faculty and the staff who worked so hard to support our students and to make the educational experience that I enjoyed possible. I came back to Gonzaga after only a year at Oxford, in part because I ran out of money. It was, in fact, very expensive, and I took a job in student affairs. And I always consider student affairs to be kind of the roots of my experience at Gonzaga. It is the experience of working in the residence halls and the experience of working in housing and residence life, and more than anything, the experience of working and supporting so many students out of those experiences that deeply has rooted my particular leadership style as a university president, focused on the question, what is it that we need to be doing for our students? Because universities exist for many reasons, but a university like Gonzaga cannot exist without its students. Without students who want to be here, without students who aspire to do great things and remain with us and then ultimately graduate and in fact go on and do great things. Because we return to those students as alumni and we ask them to help us out. It is a virtuous circle that we are developing, and we have been the beneficiaries of many generous alumni and friends who believe in the power of Gonzaga and the Gonzaga education. So my work at Gonzaga in the most recent sort of period of my experience began in 1993 when Julie, my wife, and I had been married that summer and came here together and began working in very different areas of the university, and we've never left. We've been here since then, so 30 plus years, and across that period of time we have seen many things. We have been the beneficiaries of many different people and experiences, and we've been lucky enough to play a role in helping the university imagine where it wanted to go and some of the things that it might be possible for it to do. So I share all that because I think that many of the questions and the issues that emerge when we think about ethics in the context of leadership or in the context of business mean more and they matter more when we understand the people who are trying to share out of their experience who they are and where they've been and some of the life experiences they've had that have impacted their way of thinking about their work and thinking about their priorities and thinking about the relationships that they have. Many of you who are here tonight are students of ethics. You are required to take ethics. You have been introduced to ethical thought, to ethics in the context of business and or other kinds of applications. So you know a little bit about this space. And so some of these concepts are probably pretty familiar. But I think if you go out on the street and you ask people, what do you mean when you think about, or what do you think about when somebody asks you, what does it mean to be an ethical leader? A lot of the responses that you will get are kind of along this line. You know, in the context of business, many organizations that are for profit are focused, and even nonprofits as well, on the question of whether or not they can at least balance their books, if not make a profit for their investors. So obviously there's this sort of question of, is the leader capable of enabling the organization to be productive and profitable? But the ethical dimension to that comes in when we really are talking about how they do that work, right? And so ethical leaders are ones that conduct themselves according to some kind of a set of values or moral standards. And often these are the kinds of things that people will generate. They'll talk about honesty, they'll talk about transparency, they'll talk about communication and fairness and respect. I think sometimes too, when we talk about ethical leaders, we're talking about people who understand that they have a role in being models for other people in their organizations, in the community, that they kind of carry a responsibility for sharing with people out of the way they actually do the work, how it is that they are to be in the world as ethical leaders. So they're also modeling for other people what it is to be one. And also often people will talk about ethical leaders as ones who hold themselves accountable. That is, people who recognize that they play an instrumental role in the success or the failure of the organization, the accomplishments of its goals, and so forth. And the reason I think this is super important is you'll see this stylistically with some leaders. Leaders will take credit in some cases for the success, but they'll blame others when things go wrong. And ethical leadership, we often see people, again, more of the lay person observing that ethical leadership is about acknowledging and taking responsibility, good or bad, for the decisions that the organization makes. And so these are common, what you'll find in the literature and so forth. But I think it's important to recognize that we're not in a common or average kind of context. When we think about leadership at Gonzaga, we have to place it in the context of a Catholic and Jesuit and humanistic work. And I focus specifically on Jesuit because we are a work of the Society of Jesus. We're a Jesuit work. And so in order to appreciate or understand what it means to be a leader in a Jesuit context, you have to kind of dive a little bit more deeply into the values of what it is that the Jesuits tend to focus on or talk about or say that they are in fact pursuing. And these two are probably by now, for many of you, very commonplace. You've heard them in various presentations, you've seen it in the literature, we try to share it as a community. These are kind of the values, if you will, that the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, aspire to emulate. And so we try to inculcate those values in our context as well. And therefore, to be a leader of a Jesuit university, you have to also pay attention to what Jesuit values are operative and try to mirror them, model them, and emulate them in the work that you do. Many of these are pro-social, as you would imagine. The care of the person, the care of the whole person, cura personalis. This is really a significant sort of hallmark of contemporary Jesuit parlance, but it's rooted in the idea that every individual is worthy of respect and dignity and care and love. We also talk a little bit about who we want our students to become out in the world. We talk about who we want to be out in the world, and it's not acceptable for a Jesuit university to think about itself as being neutral. If you want to be part of a Jesuit work, you have to be about contributing to the common good, to the advancement of progress, whatever that may be defined as, in service to the improving world that we all aspire to see happen. The Jesuits talk a lot about finding God in all things. By that, they really mean finding God in all people as well. That we recognize, as we think about the human person, that this is a creation of the divine, that we each are sort of formed in the image of the divine as referenced in the Bible. And the concept there is that we are called in turn to treat each other in that way, to treat each other as if we recognize the divine in each other. And that's really the aspiration behind the Magis, the ever greater, the more, that concept that we're striving to become better as organizations, as individuals, as human beings. And we want that for each other as well. The Jesuits talk about integrated individuals, integrated humanity, integrated experience. The idea that who we are in a given place is the same as we are in other places, that we understand that part of our project is to try to pull together the disparate elements of our experience and try to make sense of them. The Jesuits also talk about intellectual excellence and rigor. So a hallmark of a Jesuit education is that it stretches us and that it pushes us and it challenges us. And it asks us to ask of ourselves questions that maybe other people aren't asking, and maybe challenging ourselves to think about things that we might find uncomfortable. It also compels us to think about the fact that we all are people of privilege or on some kind of a privilege continuum, but there are some who have and enjoy far less privilege. And so where are we in relationship to those as we think about the totality of humans on the planet and how we're moving as a global community, as a community of human beings? Who are those people who need us? Who are those people who need our help? Who are those people who need our voice? Who are those people who are powerless to be able to move and to act and to affect agency in their own context? And of course, we talk a lot in an intellectual environment, in a university environment, about things that we reference commonly as the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, but it's really talking about the fact that if we're going to be truly fully developed and constantly looking at ways of improving ourselves, our mental acuity, growing and developing as human beings, we have to integrate the practice of reflection into our work, into our life, into our experiences. What is it that we are learning, even as we sit here tonight, that can help to contribute to our continued blossoming and growth and development? These are all values, and they all inform the frame of a Jesuit institution. So they also, in turn, have to inform the frame of a Jesuit leader. Now, let me talk with you a little bit about 15 years of experience. Because when I came into this work, I had already been at the university for a decade and a half. And I very unexpectedly was asked to stand in after a very successful Jesuit president had concluded his term of 11 years, and the search for his successor was not successful, i.e. the university was looking for a Jesuit to follow him and they were not able to settle on an individual that they felt was yet prepared for the presidency of the university. So they turned to me, the then interim academic vice president, an individual who had been part of the university for some time. But I will tell you that in the moment that I first was asked, I said, I don't think I'm ready. I don't think that this is something that I truly am prepared to do. I had always thought about myself as a great person standing, right beside the leader, somebody who could help them actuate their vision, but not necessarily the person who was standing in the role. And when I came into the role, because I ultimately capitulated and said, well, I guess we can try it out, let's see how this goes. Here's where we were. It was July of 2009. In 2008, we suffered as a nation a huge financial catastrophe. It was the financial crisis of 2008. It was the worst financial crisis in the markets and in the country's history since the Great Depression. Everything went upside down. The markets dropped. We have many, many stories of people who were upside down on their mortgages as a function of the timing of the markets and the ways in which they were trying to proceed in their transactions at that time. The value of our endowment at Gonzaga University was reduced by half. There were all kinds of impacts of this particular meltdown. And in the local community environment, two things were happening that were really definitional for our relationship as a Catholic and Jesuit university. The first is that just a few years prior, the Diocese of Spokane had declared bankruptcy. And that was followed just the spring of the year that I became president by the declaration of bankruptcy by the Society of Jesus in the Oregon province, which is our province. So both the local Catholic Church and the province that was our sponsor had declared bankruptcy. And in the case of the diocese, they were now post-bankruptcy, but they had virtually no money. And in the case of the province, they had just declared bankruptcy, a bankruptcy process which would then take 2 years. It was a time already, even though we talk about it today, of a great crisis that was emerging in the United States around the purpose and meaning of higher education. And we were already starting to see both states and the federal government waver in their financial support and their commitment for for higher education. And also, there was a lot of questions at that point about accreditation, the meaning of accreditation, whether accreditation was taking seriously the welfare of these institutions, and so forth. I actually had a benefactor with whom I met for lunch that fall, who, as I approached the table, said to me, Thayne, I've been thinking. We got bankruptcies going on. We got the federal government melting down. You got benefactors who don't have any money. They don't want to give any money. You got people that don't have any confidence in higher education. And I'm sitting here wondering, why would you want to be a university president? That individual was Don Herrick. Don Herrick's name's on the engineering building. He's a graduate of Gonzaga University who passed away just a few years ago, but he was passionate about engineering. He was passionate about Gonzaga, and I was there to have lunch to ask him for money. So to have him open that discussion with those questions took me aback. There was a lot going on, is the point. Where are we 15 years on? Well, over the course of 15 years, I've borne witness to many changes at Gonzaga, many changes in leadership, in deans. We also have had some wonderful opportunities to celebrate. In 2012 and 13, we celebrated the 125th anniversary of the founding of Gonzaga University, and to launch that whole year, we welcomed Archbishop Emeritus Tutu to campus. Across time, we've had a number of different PR crises that have occurred. The Affordable Care Act was passed under President Obama's administration. There were impacts of that on the Catholicity and the perception of the Catholicity of the university. The Westboro Baptist Church, which has now made its third appearance across these years, maybe fourth appearance, appeared for the first time in my tenure, and it was a huge cultural moment for the campus, an opportunity for us to really think about how we were going to be in relationship to that particular movement. There were just all kinds of different things that were going on. The clergy sex abuse crisis has been manifest across the full 15 years of my time, beginning with the bankruptcy and then moving through several different expressions as the church has continued to wrestle with this crisis and the impacts on victims, and bankruptcy after bankruptcy after bankruptcy declared in various dioceses and archdioceses across the country. We've enacted and we have followed and we have revised 3 different institutional strategic plans. I would like to think that over time we have become more and more and more recognized as an institution outside of the confines of the Northwest or the West, in part because we have been very intentional about engaging not only at the local and the regional level, but nationally and even internationally. People in Europe know Gonzaga. People in China know Gonzaga. There's just a lot of impact that Gonzaga has had and continues to have across the world in various different expressions. Athletics, huge for the university, huge for its profile, many different issues related to athletics across time. And of course, to create the kinds of environments that would be truly supportive of the work that we want to do and need to do as a university, we have done a lot of construction on the campus. And that has in turn had a huge economic impact on the region as well. This facility is one of those that we've been able to bring to life during this time. So all of that are just examples of things that have occurred. And of course, and I'll talk about it a little bit later as well, there was COVID. And COVID was really an important test and an example of something that we had to really think about and navigate. So, what is the role of the university president in this context? Well, first of all, the role is to promote and to advance the interests of the university. That is with benefactors, it's with the media, it's with the public perception, it's with those who are investing in the university, and of course, to try to do all of that in service to the educational mission. Another role is to protect the university and to defend it. And universities inevitably are drawn into lawsuits and litigation and civil claims and different types of opportunities where the university president is the decision maker about how to navigate. There is a role in developing a vision for the institution. Where is the institution moving? What are the values by which we're going to try to move? The university president serves as its chief spokesperson, but not its exclusive spokesperson. What does the university think about things? How is the university expressing its beliefs? And as CEO, which is defined in the bylaws, in the Jesuit context, the president is often referred to as the chief discerner, the chief decision maker, the person who convenes people to try to make the best decisions on behalf of the institution. What I think makes it a little bit more visible is when you try to get inside my head, because the problem is that the president has too many constituencies. These are all the constituencies that I came up with that I could share with you readily, with whom I am supposed to have some kind of operational relationship. And I've clustered them by zone, even though that may or may not be self-evident. In the lower right-hand corner, athletics. All of a sudden, we're members of 2 conferences at the same time. So the president has a role with 2 conferences instead of just 1. And let me tell you, just 1 was enough. But we also have relationships with a lot of people that are not necessarily visible to the internal community. So for example, I serve on the board of the directors of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities. I do that on behalf of Gonzaga. I do that on behalf of this region. I have recently retired from my role as the chair of the Commission on Colleges for the Northwest. That's the regional accrediting agency for all institutions in the Northwest part of the United States. And even without that, we still have direct relationships with the federal government through the Department of Education, through members of Congress, etc. We could spend a lot of time just looking at a diagram like this, but this is a way of sort of imparting to you all of the different audiences and relationships that the university president is responsible for managing. Some of them are direct management, some of them are more indirect management, but all of them matter. And many of these constituents expect direct relationship. So it's complex, and it's ever-changing, and it's very dynamic. Do you think I have contact with parents? Yes, I do. And often it starts really positively, like at new student orientation, and then it moves into not so positive interactions over time. Okay? So lots and lots of different relationships, all of which are important. Did you know I'm the president of an international company? I am. I'm the president of a real estate holding company known as Gonzaga Immobiliare SRL. That's the holding company over Gonzaga in Florence. Americans can't own property in Italy, so you have to have a holding company that owns that property on your behalf. So our Gonzaga in Florence campus actually operates under an Italian corporation, of which I am the president. So I want to talk with you about my maxims for leadership. And I hope some of these are a little provocative, get you maybe thinking a little bit, because they may not necessarily land on you, but they may not land on you in the way I think they might, but they might. Well, it'll be interesting to see what you think. A number of years ago, through the great generosity of one of our trustees who's here tonight, Greg Bowie, working at that time as an executive for Nike, shared with our team that Nike had corporate maxims. These are sort of statements of value by which Nike employees could understand what was guiding and directing the priorities of the organization. I stole the concept of the maxim, but as I've told Greg, my maxims are not as good as Nike's, but they work for me. And so I want to share them with you. I have 12 of them. Nike had fewer, they're smart, but I have 12 because I kind of wanted to mix it up, okay? The first maxim is, I'd rather be trusted than liked. How does that translate? Well, actually, this is about boundary setting in relationships, right? I worked for somebody at one time, long time ago, who had one agenda in their leadership style, and that was to make everybody in the organization happy. In so aspiring to that objective, they made no one happy because everybody was at one another to try to be happier, to try to appeal to or to curry favor with the leader. So I said, that's not working. We can't aspire to that. Now, there's a way of taking this to the extreme in the other direction because our work in a Jesuit context is highly relational. We care about one another, we work to support one another, we develop relationships by intention. It's our way of proceeding. So how we treat one another, how we work with one another is super important. My experience has been this. The coin of the realm of administrative effectiveness is trust. People can like you day in and day out, but if they don't trust you, if they don't trust your motivations, if they don't trust the agenda that you're working with, they will not react and behave in the same way with you or to you as they will if they trust you. And so placing trust at the core of the relationship for me has been a very, very important and significant way of proceeding. Part of trust is constantly paying attention to the question of who's on first, who has what responsibility, and being active in the engagement with one another about clarifying who has the role, who has the responsibility, who's holding the power, and so forth. I had a conversation just today with our CFO that was focused on the question of, yes, but whose decision is this? And whose responsibility is it to make the decision? In the context of a highly relational environment, the clarification of roles is really, really important. The importance of trust and integrity to one's effectiveness is at the heart of this maxim. And I could tell you lots of stories about trust, okay? If I have time, I will come back to it. But this is my first one. The second one is to focus on function rather than feelings. To kind of unpack this for a moment, I have been in lots of interactions where I've engaged a department or engaged colleagues, and they're really at one another, and things have become highly personalized, and people are playing the blame game, and they're looking for somebody to find fault with about whatever's happened. And I always try to come to the situation with a kind of detachment and a clinical perspective to say, well, wait a minute, before we start worrying about who did what, let's start focusing on the question of what it is that is going wrong and what it is that we need to do to address it. Because if you can depersonalize and disconnect the personal from the situation, you have a much greater chance with rapidity of addressing the issue that's actually at the heart of whatever concern or crisis has emerged. When you start focusing on the question of who did what or why did this happen, it generates fear. And when fear is informing the environment, people start to shut down. My experience, again, I'm a social scientist, but I'm a scientist, is data is really helpful. And depersonalized data is really important. So I'm a data fiend. I like information. I like it to be cleansed of the personal. Just let's get focused on the question of what do we know, and then we'll worry about how to kind of clean up the personal feelings after we've focused on the issue at hand. Third maxim, absence of documentation breeds generosity. I announced in April that I'm going to be departing the presidency. You know what started to happen? People started to come and see me and ask me if I might be able to make a commitment on behalf of the future president. This is the obverse of what happened when I came into the role. People came into my office and they said, the last president promised me X, Y, and Z. And I said, do you have a memo? Because I'm a big believer in documentation. I'm a big believer in documentation because documentation is a record of our commitments to one another. That's the way I think about it. Documentation is a form of communication. Sometimes documenting things can get you in trouble, but more often than not, carefully guarded and protected, well thought through and effectively documented, it's going to be a very, very important tool for leadership effectiveness. A fourth one, kind of a recreational one, and a really hard one for leaders, by the way, who have emerged from within their community or their culture or from maybe not leadership roles, is a role clarification question. Should I be the one doing this? Or is there somebody else whose job this really is? And I have lots of examples of that. My great colleague Julia, who's here, who I've been working with for the last 14 plus years, you know, one of her roles early in time was to assist me in making travel arrangements. I like making my own travel arrangements. So we had to kind of resolve, like, is this your job or is this my job, or is this really how you should be spending your time versus my time? Leaders have to constantly be asking themselves the question, how should I be spending my time? Because time is the one resource they can control. It's also the one resource that they are most limited in managing. This is probably the most important maxim for me. It has to do with decision making, it has to do with communication, it has to do with the ways in which we move in the world. People can get really wrapped up on goal-directed behavior. We need to get this done, and we need to get it done right away, and we need to get it done as soon as possible, and so on and so forth. But my experience is the way in which you move, how you move, is almost always more important than whatever it is you're trying to get done. It might be something small, it might be something large, but if your sole focus is on the question of what needs to get done and not how you're bringing people along, how people are impacted by the decision-making process, you can easily lose people and you can lose traction with them. Here's another useful maxim, because I find that especially in high-tension situations involving maybe personnel issues or a crisis of some kind where tempers are flaring or where emotions are high, we can get all wrapped up in the complexity of the situation. My experience is that if I'm having difficulty trying to figure out what the strategy needs to be in order to get past this thing or to success, that I've made it too complicated. I need to simplify. This is based on Nike, I remember it. Simplify and go. Simplify and go. If you fear it, if something is causing you fear as a leader, take a step back, simplify. Make it as simple as possible. One of my favorites, not necessarily the most important, but one of my favorites, is this maxim. Wisdom and intelligence in the context of organizations are not the same thing. Intelligence is really about knowing how things are supposed to work. Wisdom is about understanding how they actually work. They're not the same thing, because what mediates those are people and their needs and their tendencies and their desires and their desire for agency. And I have lots of stories if we had time, but I won't go into it. This is a cardinal principle, a maxim that is really important for both leaders and also those that they are leading in the community. If you had all the information I do, I believe you would come to the same conclusion. The problem is leaders often have access to information they can't share. They actually are prohibited, they are legally prevented, or privacy laws or some policies that have been enacted prevent them from revealing all of the information that they have available to them. This is where we come back to the number one maxim, trust. If people don't trust you when you're in a situation where you have information and are making a decision and they don't, then they're far less likely to follow with support the decision you've made. Trust is essential in so many situations, and creating a context and a culture of trust is so important. Number 9, so many leaders evaluate their own effectiveness by whether or not they've been successful in accomplishing a goal. And that's a good way of assessing leadership effectiveness, but my experience is that sometimes this gets intertwined with another construct, which is that the leader always has to believe that they're right and always has to be seen as being correct. And my experience is leaders often don't have all the information they need, and they don't seek the input of all the people they should. And as a result, their logic and their decision-making is often flawed. Leadership effectiveness, in my experience, is about doing what it takes in order to be effective and worrying less about whether or not the decision is the right one. It's a difficult distinction to make sometimes, but I think an important one. When an institution is atrophying or when they're faced with crisis or challenge, often leaders also atrophy. What I found is that what prevents most leaders from making change, even though it might be painful, even though it might affect people very deeply and personally, is not having a plan. And so I always take the time when I'm finding myself in a situation where I'm really faced with a conundrum, stepping back, sometimes out entirely, and conferring with other wise people to say, hey, when your institution or your organization was faced with a challenge like this, what did you do? What was the plan that you created for your organization? Being able to create or begin to create a plan of action is the first step towards getting yourself out of what Father Coughlin, a previous president, used to call the briar patch. And we were in a lot of briar patches as an institution during his time. Just two more. Leadership effectiveness, in my view, is about leading with humility. Humility is really about understanding that most of the people in the room are actually just as, if not smarter than you are, and recognizing that everybody has something to teach somebody else. Many leaders come in with a persona that says, I need to be the smartest person in the room. I need to be the one that everybody sees as the smartest person in the room. And in my experience, you've lost people right there. The most effective leaders are people who come understanding that we all have personal histories and experiences to share, and that sometimes the person you least expect has an insight that will change the entire game. If you're not in access with them, if you're not talking with them, if you're not engaged with them, you're not going to be able to have that information. In the Michael Jordan documentary, I don't remember exactly who produced it, there was a clip where his coach early in his career said, you know, Michael, there's no I in team. And he responded, you're right, coach, but there's an I in win. It took Michael Jordan a long time to become a member of a team. In university administration, it's always about the team. It's always about the we. It's always about our effectiveness and our collective success. And for me, it all comes back down to the question of who are we here for? Because really, in a lot of ways, the best decisions we've made as a university start and end with conversations with students. What do we need? What do we need most to make your journey as effective as it can be? What is it that we can do that is going to really change the game for you and allow you to be successful? Education is our mission. If we ever stray from that as our singular focus, then we're really not doing the work that we've been called to do, and we won't do it in the way that we need to do it. I've got ethical situations that we could talk about. One of the most important ones, I'll say this one, was COVID. If you were a university president in the summer of 2020, this is what the articles in the popular press were that you were reading. The presenting question, and it was made with all good intention and without a whole lot of subtlety, was, by reopening, are you going to kill people? Do you remember pictures like this? You remember drive-through testing? How quickly we can forget this stuff. But you remember this? These were all over the place. The fundamental question was, what does this virus do, and to whom, and to what degree, and what kind of control do we have over it? But there are many universities that made the elective decision to remain online for the entire year, and they were buying time until a vaccine was made available. That's what their strategy was. Gonzaga University, we invited people back for the fall of 2020. This presented many ethical questions for me, for the Board of Trustees, for the leadership of the institution. Did we make the right decision or not? Were we effective in the ways in which we implemented strategy or not? Did we remain faithful to our mission and the ways in which we were taking care of people as we proceeded into that year or not? These are the issues of that time. And truly, I say this to you, I think after that and during that was a time when a lot of university presidents said, I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. It's too much. It's too hard. We have very little time left, but I would be happy to take a question or two before we wrap it up. I am grateful for those of you who remained through this period of time. I hope it was a helpful little overview, but happy to take any questions you might have. And if you don't have questions, that's okay. I have more slides. There's a microphone.
Okay, Joe.
I didn't realize asking a question meant you had to step up and talk to the mic, but there was a slide that said something about, was it dogs and guns? I was just curious what that was. You didn't touch on that.
Yes, this is a great example of going back in time. Here is the situation. There were a couple of students living off campus in a university-managed apartment. And one night, a person who was unhoused came to their door and knocked on their door, and that individual was looking for money. And when they opened the door, the two individuals, one of them had a shotgun with which they confronted the unhoused person. And because firearms are not permitted in university-owned or managed apartments or housing, campus security got involved when the unhoused person went to security and reported what had happened. And they went to the apartment and they seized the rifle from the residents. And this actually became a national Second Amendment news story. The two students went on national television. It became a story about whether or not Gonzaga was opposed to the Second Amendment. It was a big, flashy deal because of the visibility of Gonzaga and because of the heat of that issue. What was really challenging from my perspective is that we completely forgot the question of, is this how we want to be with an unhoused person who comes in the middle of the night seeking aid? That completely went to the wayside and became focused on this question of whether or not we were or were not supportive of the right to bear arms. And it was object lesson as well in how quickly things can become inflamed. But there were actually a lot of ethical questions that were embedded in that situation. And we referred to it colloquially as dogs with guns. Because it became kind of a watershed moment in the experience of our PR and the way in which we were managing PR at that time.
Dogs with guns. Thanks, Joe, for our one question. Appreciate
Okay.
that.
So that's our one question.
That's our one question. I want to thank all of you for being here. Please join me in thanking Gonzaga University President Dr. Thayne McCulloh for the last.
Thank you all. Have a good night.